Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
To people there in Zoom land, glad you can be with us today. And on YouTube, we'll see you later on because that's posted later. And everybody here present in the here and now, thank you for coming here to Unity today. It's a wonderful thing that we can come together, even given the conditions that we're currently living in. It does kind of grieve my heart a little bit to see currently how our nation really needs to heal. And so I pray every day that there is a healing and a consciousness that comes to bear in all of our affairs as we go through this time of challenge, and we know that in the end it'll be for our highest good. So keep not only the world but our nation in your prayers as we go forward through this time of our lives. On another note, I remember, if some of you might remember a television program back in the late 50s, early 60s that was hosted by an incredible human being by the name of Rod Serling. And he had a program called The Twilight Zone. And he always started his program with the proposition of, imagine if you will, an atheist pulls up to a car stopped at a green light with a bumper sticker that says, honk if you love Jesus. You know, it's kind of a conundrum at that point. He has to make a choice. He might just yell rather than honk, rather than have to actually coalesce to the suggestion that the bumper sticker gives. I just thought it was a great irony, though. I love ironies of life because they kind of reveal the truth in some way, in some fashion. It seems to speak to me at the time when I need to be spoke to. I get to be the last one to speak on this month's theme of aligning our will. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers that have spoke on this theme, starting with Reverend Susan Gum, and then of course Nancy Leifer, Cheryl Silverman, Louise Harvey spoke eloquently last week. And I come up riding the trail dust on this theme of aligning our will. I've had time to think about that. I've listened to the speakers. Of course, I'm here every Sunday. And it's really interesting to see everybody's different perspective on the theme. And it's like, what can I say about the theme? Everybody's kind of, filled with nooks and crannies in terms of aligning our will. A thought came to my mind, the word aligning. It's like I know, in terms of auto mechanics, every now and then our front end gets a little out of adjustment, and we need to have a front end alignment. Well, that happens in my life from time to time, that I need to, get a front end alignment. I need to get a front end alignment right here with my connection with my higher power, with Source, with Spirit. And that's the whole intention of what we're doing here at Unity. We come here basically to get aligned every Sunday. And then from here, we go out into our daily lives and try to practice the principles that we know to be true and how they apply to our own lives. Here at Unity, we practice the principles of prayer and meditation, and through trying to apply those principles in a practical way in our lives. We don't really use the old paradigm of the Old Testament in terms of seeing God as this anthropomorphic being, of course, that's up in the clouds, throwing down thunderbolts when we err or make wrong decisions and do not listen to His total commandments. It's a little draconian in that old world perception. And here in Unity, of course, the new thought, we look at God, Spirit, Source, as being, of course, omnipresent, everywhere present, one Source, one power in all things. I like the word that I came across that says God means good, orderly direction. And that's what we do when our intention is to realign ourselves, realign our will to our higher selves. It's interesting in the readings I've been doing from the Fillmores, Myrtle and Charles, and Charles' second wife, Cora. They have some interesting insights about will, the power. This is the power that we're talking about in their theme. And it goes on to describe there's a difference between, in terms of our will, human will and divine will. Usually in our human will, it's based on our ego, our personalities. We find ourselves being willful, and it's more based on our material desires. I want what I want when I want it, and I want it now. It's more the me kind of dimension of our human personality. As opposed to willing connotates an openness to be accepting, to be open to the divinity within us, to gain that insight that leads us to our higher good. I sometimes have a hard time with that, especially in these times. Discerning, judgment, it's kind of linked into this ability of will as well. Judgment. We make decisions and choices. The Fillmores go on to talk about the aspect that these powers and or abilities, not one of them dominates the other. They're all linked together. With will, we're linked in with judgment, discernment, and understanding, which leads to wisdom. So they're really all interconnected when we look at the total 12 powers that we have, our innate, organic, divine abilities within us. I came across a saying that someone said that the ego wants to control the soul. And that's true, that's our willfulness. Wants to control and keep impeding us from reaching our highest good or reconnecting and staying connected with our higher power, God's source, however you want to define that spirit in your life. So this is our practice every day. It's like it's not a static kind of thing. I mean, I don't all of a sudden reach that connectedness with my God, with spirit, and I'm in bliss for the rest of my life. No, that doesn't happen because I remember, and I'm reminded constantly that I am human as well. My intention is to stay connected as much as possible to the divinity within me and align myself with God's Spirit. Extenuating circumstances have their own agenda, let's say. And it's up to me as I go along in my spiritual path and I make progression with my spirituality that I absorb and learn the lessons that Unity gives me in terms of feeding my spirit to where I can buoy the storms of life. Even Jesus, when he was on the Sea of Galilee with his disciples, and they were feared for their lives because of the tempest. And Jesus awoke from sleep and said, "Peace, be still." It was an act of will to manifest peace and calm the sea, the raging storms. Well, metaphorically, we can see how that applies in our own lives, in our minds, in our day-to-day circumstances, when we're at odds with what's going on in the world, with our relationships with ourselves, and we succumb to the negative thoughts that we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, and gosh darn it, people don't like me. that's really, submitting to a different kind of will. That's a material kind of will. I'd like to read a few things. I'd like to cite our founders in Unity, Charles and Myrtle and Cora. This reading is from Comfort of Prayer, and it's from Myrtle Fillmore. It's the conclusion of an essay she gave on how to let God help you. And I think this is kind of important to kind of remind us of how we get realigned with our will that guides us to our divine will. And she concludes by saying this, and Myrtle is very, very adamant, if you can imagine her saying this. She says, "Let me say it again, stop trying so hard to know that everything is as it should be. Just rest your mind and heart and emotions and body in God-mind. When you are truly thinking God, you cannot struggle to do anything. It is when you are thinking of self that you struggle and see nothing but darkness and grief and failure. No one, not even God, can change you or your circumstances so long as you insist upon looking at and thinking of and worrying about yourself and your problems. Your problems do not exist. Your problems do not exist except in your mind. And they are there only because you have made them. As soon as you withdraw your thoughts and feelings from the things which you have invited and built up, they will fall flat and dissolve. By abiding in God-mind, which means perfect order and satisfaction, you will build a new world of peace, joy, wholeness, and success according to the direction of Christ ideas. Christ is the real self of each individual. By seeing only the Christ in all people, we not only strengthen our own spiritual consciousness, but help all whom we contact to realize and express their innate divinity." And that's from Myrtle's How to Let God Help You. It's a good direction. It's a good directive. Or I would say Myrtle is suggesting, giving you a recommendation to see the Christ in you that abides in you, that is innate in you, and then go forth and then lighten others with the ability to help them see their own light within themselves. Bring that forth. Some of the reasons I've come across that Jesus said that Unity considers, of course, as a demonstration of perfect man, a way shower, that in being in Christ, you are a new creation. All things in the past are behind you. They dissolve, they're flat. They no longer really have any influence over you in the here and now. All things are past. You are a new creation. I like that idea. It's exciting to think that we have these potentialities every moment that we live. And every moment we have the ability to, through our will, to choose, decide, and then lead through those decisions that we make. But through discernment and judgment, through that ability and power, we're able to figure out which choice we want to make for our lives, which is our highest good. And then it's the will that puts that into action. I think Charles from Christian Healing said that the will is the executive faculty of the mind and carries out the edicts of the I am. So we willingly choose, our inner divinity wants us to choose what is our highest good for ourselves. Charles goes on to say this from 12 Powers. Will as exercised by man is the negative pole of the great executive force of the universe. The recognition of this in silent meditation opens the will to the inflow of this mighty moving principle, and the power that moves to action the members of the body reaches into the invisible realms of ideas and controls the elements. It was comprehension of the will universal that enabled Jesus to say to the wind and the waves, "Peace, be still." Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are inalienable rights of man, and they should never be interfered with. Hypnotism, mesmerism, and mediumship are based on the submission of one will to another. The one who desires control demands another's submission in mind and body to his own willed thoughts and words of directive power. The effect on one who submits is always weakened, and, if continued, results in a mental negation that makes him the victim of evil influences too numerous to mention. "Not my will, but thine be done" is one of the most far-reaching affirmations of Jesus, and those who followed him and keep his sayings are finding great peace and relaxation of mind and body. And he concludes by saying, Jesus, the mighty helper, is always present with those who are earnestly seeking to be Christians and to keep the divine law. So we're not talking about unity in terms of Jesus, the person, so much as the Christ that was in Jesus, as we understand it here in unity. That indwelling spirit that directs all good, our highest power. Later on, Cora goes on to say this about will. We have gradually drifted away from our, and I read this and I thought, well, this is how timely is this? We have gradually drifted away from our central I am into the outer realms of consciousness until today we dwell largely in the night of our minds. We've become involved in external entanglements and confusion until our consciousness has lost the real power of spirit. We have become willful, which is the cause of much of our suffering. We have lost almost all conception of what it is to hear and to heed the voice of indwelling spirit. We look to man-made laws and to man's opinions of standards of living and think that in worldly affairs there is no place for religion. The affairs of the world have been carried on independent of the higher powers until today our civilization is approaching chaos. And I thought, wow, that was written back in 1937. 1937, and here we are today. A similar kind of dynamic going on in our human societies. You know, that's why I ask that we pray for this nation and for this world, because we need an opening up and a willingness to align our will with a higher spirit, and let there be a great outpouring of that divine spirit in all of humanity, all humankind. So Fillmores are great. I love the Fillmores. Their language tends to be a little archaic these days, and we've had several Unity authors and scholars update the language. Paul Hasselbeck is one of those, along with the Jaffalas, who were responsible for the quest, and kind of contemporized the principles of the Unity teachings and of New Thought. There was a really interesting article that was written by Winifred Wilkeson Hausman. She's a great Unity teacher. And she wrote this short little article about how to re-educate your executive faculty. It's not so much an indoctrination, it is just an understanding that leads to divine wisdom. It is our job in developing our God-given potentialities to re-educate the will, the directing power of our mind, to teach it to become receptive to spiritual motivation rather than to the goals determined by our materialistic pursuits alone. One way or the other, we are using our will, our executive mind power all the time. We choose a course of action. We resist or resent. We submit or fight back. We aim high or we slide backwards, or we are willing or we are willing to consecrate and dedicate our will to God and let it be re-educated to go His way. Now, Jesus, our way shower, in overcoming human selfish motivations of the will and allowing it to be replaced by a great unification used with divine will, produced good for all. The rewards of unifying our wills with the will of God are great. They include health, happiness, joy, peace, harmony, prosperity, and other good that we cannot even visualize in our present state of consciousness. Many inharmonies in human relationships result from the clash of human wills. Learning to activate the divine will in your life does not mean that you will simply submit to the human will of others. Instead, it will give you a new freedom that recognizes the human force applied by others, but does not submit to it. And when you find yourself confronted by a strong will that insists that you go its way, turn within to the Christ, the God self, the spiritual core of your nature, and silently say to the other person, "The Christ in me beholds the Christ in you." Let the love of God and the understanding of the spiritual nature of that other person pour forth from you so strongly that there is no conflict of human wills. Rather, there is a higher power at work, establishing harmony and order. We can start first to awaken the will and train it by consciously watching its activities and directing it through our growing spiritual understanding. So we need to always remember that we have the potential, the potentiality and the power within us to transcend our differences in terms of that willfulness of someone else, and submitting to that, that level of consciousness. In the Paul Hasselbeck, in his powering up your abilities, redefinition of the 12 powers, he talks about in each power, he always talks in each chapter about the levels of consciousness, and I always like to cite those levels of consciousness. But for time purposes, it's just that, the ego-based personality will is such as that's the underdeveloped consciousness of will is like, it's kind of like the wishy-washy, whatever, and you just kind of take it as it comes, and you just accept whatever is given you or what happens, and it's kind of undirected and kind of undefined and unfocused, and so you live a life like that. And the results of the circumstances of your life when you live it like that, manifest themselves in very harmful ways sometimes, not very helpful ways as well. And then there's the overdeveloped will of the ego personality. It's like the personality ego that says, "My way or the highway." If you run across those kind of personalities, probably in a workplace or in some sort of organization or structure that, they have to have it their way. They have a hard time. They're very stubborn, and have the ability to be flexible, and they're really, being very willful. Same as a 2-year-old toddler who doesn't get their way. They're just bigger infants, I guess. But then we go on in terms of level of consciousness, and we get into the ideas of where we're bringing in perception of our senses, smells, sight, hearing, sound, and all those things. And we're able to make discernments and choices that determine how we want things to be, the decisions we make, knowledgeable decisions, those choices. But they're still human-based in terms of dealing in the materialistic world. They're not really addressing our spiritual nature and feeding our spiritual nature as such. It's only when we go to the next level of the will that is in alignment with divine law, with divine will, that we adhere to the principles of the divine within us, the truths and the principles that we practice and learn about in unity, that help us realize to become the best person and the best Christ we can be. I've never, in my experience here at Unity, I've run across individuals who say, well, my Christ is better than your Christ. It's just not the case. It doesn't happen when you're at that level of transcendence, because we realize that we are all one in spirit and in the light of a living, loving Christ and a loving God giving us good, orderly direction. And so it is. We practice this every day in terms of aligning, realigning. When we're born, I believe that we are perfectly aligned. And it's life and life circumstances that create our being out of alignment from time to time. We come back in certain circumstances and situations and align ourselves, and then that lasts for a while, and then because of the nature of the world, that we find ourselves lacking certain things, or we forget, we go to sleep, and we don't practice these principles on a daily basis. That's why in Unity, we realize that prayer and meditation is vital to our spiritual progress. We don't talk about perfection, spiritual perfection. We talk about spiritual progress. We talk about the path. And along that path are stepping stones. And each stepping stone that we take, we look around and our perspective changes as we move towards our higher good, whatever that manifests itself to be, because of our own individual expression of the divinity within us, and how that is manifested, and what it is that we desire, our spirit desires for us to have in this life. I'm going to end my talk with a meditation, and it's from a wonderful book by Linda Martell Winsett, and she's been mentioned before in terms of divine audacity. This is a wonderful, wonderful work. It's really a powerful reinterpretation of the 12 powers. She goes into each ability power and writes in such a way that it really has practical application to our lives when we're seeking spiritual nourishment, spiritual reinforcement, and that support that we all desire and want in our lives. And so, I would ask you to get comfortable wherever you're at, in pews, at home, and on YouTube. Take a deep breath. Breathe in and exhale. Breathe in and exhale. And one more time. Breathe in and exhale. And in the brain's frontal lobe lies the energy vortex for the power of spiritual will. I concentrate my attention on this area responsible for executive functioning, such as my ability to focus verbally and visually, to remember and make connections between ideas, and to choose. I shine the silver light of will throughout the front of my brain, across my forehead, and up to the crown of my head. I clear my busy brain of preconceived notions and all false imaginings. Centered in this spiritual will, I affirm my capacity to choose. Guided by my companion powers of understanding, wisdom, and imagination, I am able to draw from infinite possibilities one divine idea. This one divine idea seems to catch hold of me. It appears as my powerful desire. It becomes rooted in my awareness as mine. I affirm my capacity to commit a path ahead. I affirm my capacity to commit to a path ahead. I will be a blessing. I will live as the light of the world. I will. I will. I will. I will set upon a course of action that supports my choice. I live in integrity, honoring my commitment and holding myself accountable to what I say and what I do. I affirm my willingness. I am willing. I am willing to remain attuned to the source of all good. I allow life to unfold. I acquiesce to the truth, and I cooperate with the impulse of my divine identity. I am willing to be centered, unruffled as time passes and light shines on my path ahead. I am willing to courageously decide what I have to do and be. I am willing to boldly reach for my next goal. I am willing to stretch beyond perceived limits. I am willing to walk with confidence into my future. I am willing to risk being vulnerable in love. I am willing to listen without feeling threatened. I am willing to experience the joy of living today. I am willing to be purposeful, to know I am divine. Divine will is my spiritual name and nature. I am willing to be the light of the world, wherever I am and whatever the circumstances. And so it is that in this moment, I am willing to let go, release all of that other stuff that holds me from my highest good. For I know in the core of the I am to be that which I am to be. When I align my will with my true divine identity. And so it is, so it is. Amen and amen.